Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of Martin Van Buren, and the focus is Washington and Albany. The year is 1821, and Van Buren is getting set to begin his first stint as a United States Senator, moving from the state capital of New York, Albany, to the national capital, Washington, D.C. But his mindset wasn't changing. He was still very much fixated on New York state politics, patronage, appointments, winning office. This was his focus in New York. It was still his focus when he was in the nation's capital. In fact, his group that still followed him had a name, the Albany Regency, and they very much continued to take their cues from their leader, Martin Van Buren. Just because he had moved a few hundred miles away didn't really change that fact, nor did it change what Van Buren was focused on, as we see. And one of the first things he focused on was a political appointment that was about to go to one of his political rivals. Solomon von Rensselaer was up for the Deputy Postmaster General of New York. This is a minor position, but it was a federal appointment in his state to a political enemy, and Martin Van Buren was out to stop it. He said that I am for taking the bull by the horns at once, and if our friends at home sustain us, we will effect it. We will stop this appointment. And he pulled out all the stops. He got everyone from New York and in Washington on board, the Vice President of the United States, the congressional delegation from New York, all hounding President Monroe over this relatively minor position, keep von Rensselaer from getting this job. Well, Monroe paid attention. He called a cabinet meeting. They talked about it. And he realized this is a minor post. He washed his hands of it and told his own postmaster general, appoint whoever you want. Van Rensselaer got the job, but Van Buren certainly had made a point in his very first moves in Washington, D.C., where his mindset was going to be and where he was going to apply some of his time focusing back on those jobs in his home state. In terms of his role in the Senate, Van Buren sat on a couple of committees, the Senate Finance Committee, the Senate Judiciary Committee, but he was much more of a behind-the-scenes person. There was no major legislation that came from Van Buren. He was never a great orator, so no big speeches on the floor of the United States Senate. Again, very much focused on activities behind the scenes, while always keeping an eye on what was going on in his home state of New York. He also had a charge leveled against him, and the phrase was non-commitalism about Van Buren. And the concept was that he tended to wait until seeing which way the wind blows on a piece of policy or legislation, and eventually, if it's blown enough in one direction, he would jump on board, and that's when he would commit. Well, Van Buren really bristled at this. He thought it was unfair. He was a loyal and consistent Jeffersonian from a policy standpoint in his own mind, and he thought the term was inappropriate. It actually has some relevance, certainly in his Senate tenure. There's some truth to the term, but later in his career, even though the term stuck a little bit, really much less appropriate, and we'll cover that more in some future episodes. One thing never changes for Van Buren. He was always popular, jovial, happy in a social scene, always welcome, and his stature was definitely on the rise as well. A New Yorker stepped down from the Supreme Court, and Van Buren was considered for the opening. As another New Yorker to take the spot. He was interested in it, but eventually it went to some member of the James Monroe cabinet. Smith Thompson, who was the Secretary of the Navy, got the job, but again, you can see Van Buren's name starting to be included in some of these more lofty levels of political discussion. Van Buren's probably happiest days in these early times in the U.S. Senate came in 1823, again, based on something back in New York, when his political rival, DeWitt Clinton, lost his re-election bid for governor. Clinton made a really interesting statement at the time. It is easy to see that the difference is nominal, that the whole controversy is about office, and that the country is constantly assailed by ambitious demagogues for the purpose of gratifying their cupidity. It is a melancholy but true reflection on human nature that the smaller the difference, the greater the animosity. There wasn't much of a difference politically between Van Buren and his followers and Clinton and his followers. They were actually fairly aligned politically or ideologically, but they were at war with each other in pursuit of office. That was sort of the goal in and of itself, and they pulled out all the stops. So the statement was a fair one for Clinton to make, and if you read between the lines, it really was likely focused on his political enemy. Martin Van Buren is who he was really talking about. Well, Van Buren was this master of the partisan process. He had his Albany Regency pushing things in his direction, but he had something else going for him as well. Around this time, they established a formal press organ, the Albany Argus, which won some state printing contracts to kind of pay the bills, but mostly it was in place to promote the cause of Martin Van Buren's Albany Regency. He said at the time, without a paper thus edited at Albany, we may hang our harps on the willows. With it, the party can survive 1,000 convulsions. It was another critical element for Van Buren putting together a total machine that could help drive political victories to retain power, and now he had the press organ to go with his organizational structure that he had put in place. Well, Van Buren was clear. He knew how to win elections at the state level. What about at the national level? That was about to be tested. It's 1824, presidential election year, and it's wide open. There are 5 candidates effectively vying for James Monroe's seat. 3 came from Monroe's cabinet: John Quincy Adams, John Calhoun, William Crawford. All 3 cabinet secretaries were desirous of following in Monroe's footsteps. Plus, you had Henry Clay, the Speaker of the House from Kentucky, and the former General Andrew Jackson from Tennessee was getting a lot of push from his Western colleagues. So a wide open race. Where would Van Buren sit in all this? Well, he was about to take a spot. As Calhoun dropped out, he decided to focus on the vice presidency for now, maybe run for president later. And Van Buren didn't know Jackson at all, so it wasn't going to align with him, and he was very much against the policies of Adams and Henry Clay, so it was William Crawford. He decided to get in bed with Crawford, who held on to most of his Jeffersonian principles, and it was a time that he said he was making his debut in the art and business of president making. He had made elections work at the state level. Could he do it at the national level? Well, there was one problem. William Crawford suffered a debilitating stroke during the course of the campaign. He stayed in the race. He was slowly recovering, and Van Buren was doing the best he could to rally. He stuck with Crawford throughout the canvass, and his goal was just to get Crawford into the top 3. With so many candidates, it was thought that it would likely go to the House of Representatives. There would be no majority winner in the Electoral College, and Van Buren thought if there's any chance, if he can get Crawford into the top 3, which are the ones that could be considered by the House, then maybe he'd have a chance to win. Well, Crawford did get into the top 3, but barely. Jackson was the leader in the Electoral College, followed by Adams, and Crawford edged Clay by 4 votes in the Electoral College. Nobody got a majority, so it indeed went to the House of Representatives. The problem was nobody was thinking of Crawford at the time. This was really a 2-man race between Adams and Jackson. Henry Clay, very much thought of as potential kingmaker or president maker in this case, as he was very influential and well liked and respected as Speaker of the House. In the end, he ended up supporting Adams, which was not a surprise. He was very much aligned politically, almost entirely, in fact, with Adams, and he loathed Andrew Jackson. They hated each other from some past experiences, and they were very politically different, so it wasn't a surprise that Clay would support Adams. Enough states switched over to Adams. Adams wins the presidency in the House on the first ballot. He then goes and names Clay as his Secretary of State, and all of a sudden, Jackson's supporters cried foul. They cried corrupt bargain, secret dealings behind the scenes to get Clay to support Adams in order to win and then get his spot as Secretary of State. This would hover over the next 4 years throughout the Adams administration and leading toward that 1828 subsequent election. But it was not a victory for Van Buren. His guy got to the House but did not win, so that was a setback, but then he was about to have another setback back in New York. At the end of the legislative session in his home state, a member of his regency made a political error. On the last day of the legislative session, Judge Roger Skinner orchestrated a plan to remove DeWitt Clinton from the Canal Board. Now, the Erie Canal had been Clinton's brainchild. He had been pushing for it really since the idea came into play. It's now getting close to being finished. He had already lost the governorship. He was down, and to strip him away from the Canal Board was seen as very petty on behalf of the Regency. It did not play well in the press or in the state. Van Buren himself thought it was a mistake. He thought it was unusual that it had actually given Clinton something he had never before possessed: the sympathies of the people. As for Judge Skinner, he told him, "I hope, Judge, you are now satisfied that there is such a thing in politics as killing a man too dead. You beat a man when he's down, and he can all of a sudden rise. And that's what happened. Clinton's supporter, he got the sympathy support from across the state. He was re-elected governor in the next election, and the Regency candidates lost badly across the state. It was a really low point for Van Buren. As he said, "I left Albany for Washington as completely broken down a politician as my bitterest enemies could desire." Tough losses, national level, state level. Heading back to Washington to resume his duties as the Senate. John Quincy Adams is in the White House, but he's a political professional. Van Buren knew what his job was, and that was to be the leader of the opposition. But that's the story for another day. And that is Martin Van Buren and Washington and Albany from the life of Martin Van Buren. For more Presidential Chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles.